Good day, this is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from Kalamata, Greece for a Reason to Resist on September 28th, 2025. Folks, the endless ceasefire Kabuki theater has entered a new phase with a major report published yesterday by the Times of Israel. According to the Times, Trump's so-called peace envoy, Steve Witkoff, has formulated a 21-point plan for ending the war in Gaza and securing the release of the 20 or so Israeli prisoners of war who remain in the custody of Palestinian militants in the Strip. The Times reports that it has gained access to a copy of the plan and that the copy it has seen has been, quote, authenticated by two sources familiar with the matter, close quote. Before we get into the details of this plan, let's quickly review how we got here. For nearly 2 years, Israel has been committing genocide in Gaza before the eyes of the world. It has been live streamed and has been conducted in arguably the most brazen manner of any genocide in human history. The justification Israel and the West have offered for this bloodbath are the attacks on Israel by Palestinian militants, including those of Hamas, on October 7, 2023. But Israel, and it never wants us to take cognizance of this fact, was committing multiple crimes against humanity and war crimes against Palestinians for decades prior to the attacks of October 7th, 2023. Those war crimes and crimes against humanity, including torture, including the torture of children, collective punishment, ethnic cleansing, the theft of resources, land, illegal settlements on occupied Palestinian territory, arbitrary detention, extrajudicial assassination, and on and on. Perhaps most importantly, Israel started building settlements, illegal in nature, as has been acknowledged for decades by virtually the entire international community, in the West Bank all the way back in 1967. That is 20 years, I repeat, 20 years before Hamas was created in 1987. So there's simply no logical way for Israel to justify its settlement project, which has rendered the creation of a truly sovereign and viable Palestinian state on the occupied West Bank a practical impossibility. There's no way Israel can justify that by the activities of Hamas, because Israel was engaging in illegal settlement construction and expansion for 2 decades before Hamas was even created. The fact is that Israel's plan has always been to ethnically cleanse historic Palestine. The October 7th attacks simply provided to the genocidal entity a pretext for escalating its decades-long project of ethnic cleansing. Since October 7th, the U.S. government has engaged in, as I indicated and have talked about many times, a relentless Kabuki theater designed to persuade us that it is an innocent bystander in the slaughter, and B, a neutral party that is in a position to meaningfully negotiate some kind of resolution, and C, seriously concerned about achieving peace in Gaza. It has claimed relentlessly that it is trying to secure a ceasefire and that a peace deal with Gaza is just around the corner, even though it has repeatedly blocked resolutions at the United Nations Security Council that would impose a ceasefire on Israel. The most recent U.S. veto came just last week, days before we learned of this supposed 21-point peace plan. On September 18th, the Trump regime voted against a UN Security Council resolution calling for an immediate, unconditional, and permanent ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. The negative vote was cast as famine spread across the besieged enclave, and Israel pursued a murderous assault on Gaza City. So why has the U.S. put on the spectacle of trying to negotiate a peace deal while blocking demands for a ceasefire? Well, for the simple reason that that is what the majority of Americans and other people in the West, and certainly in the broader world, want. They want peace, and they're becoming increasingly agitated about the fact that Israel is being not only permitted by the West, but enabled by the West to carry out the mass murder of Palestinian children and the starvation of the civilian population in Gaza. What this Kabuki theater enables Western governments, and particularly Washington to do is to place a distance between themselves and the crimes of Israel, and to shift as much responsibility as possible onto Netanyahu, while they themselves wash their hands of the affair and saying they are doing all they reasonably can, consistently with the security interests of their ally Israel, to bring an end to the mass killing. Now, as I mentioned, the Times of Israel claims that the author of this 21-point plan is Steve Witkoff. Look, I've been saying for months that Steve Witkoff is a war criminal and a fraud. What has he accomplished, not only in West Asia in terms of securing peace, but also in Ukraine? After all the meetings and the jet setting that he has done, and all the glad handling with leaders of non-Western states, he's accomplished precisely nothing. In fact, we have seen new wars on Witkoff's watch, including, in particular, the U.S.-Israel criminal war of aggression on the Islamic Republic. And let us remember, this is most important to understand when we assess the credibility of any plan formulated by Witkoff, that it was Witkoff who tried to deceive the Iranians into believing that the U.S. was not going to pursue a military option before exhausting all diplomatic options, that the U.S. government was engaged in real negotiations towards some kind of a resolution of the nuclear enrichment issue or the uranium enrichment issue in Iran. And as the Iranians were taking Witkoff in his word and preparing for a meeting, a third or fourth meeting in the course of these supposed negotiations to resolve the nuclear enrichment issue, Israel and the United States collectively launched a criminal war of aggression against Iran. Witkoff is a prop. He's a fraud. He is there simply to persuade us on behalf of the Donald that the administration he represents is genuinely trying to achieve peace, while at the same time that administration is perpetrating a genocide and launching criminal wars of aggression. Now, quite apart from Witkoff's history of treachery and perfidy, the US and Israel just tried to murder the negotiating team of Hamas in Qatar. Now, you could hardly imagine an act that is more designed to destroy any possibility of a negotiated peace than murdering the people who have been assigned by your adversary to negotiate that peace. So here we are, just days after, a few weeks, beyond the time at which Israel, with undoubtedly the consent of the United States government and in fact the support of the US military, violated the sovereignty of Qatar in the most fundamental way, tried to wipe out the negotiators, but unsuccessfully. And now we're being told that all of a sudden these same characters are genuinely interested in peace. Quite apart from all that, the Trump regime just decided to provide another $6.4 billion in military aid to the genocidal entity. The military aid consists largely of dozens of the most advanced Apache helicopters, which are basically airborne killing machines. So when you add it all up, there's zero reason to believe that the Trump regime's 21-point peace plan is serious, and many compelling reasons to believe that it is more Kabuki theater. Now, according to US Vice President J.D. Vance, we are very close indeed to finally securing a peace deal. And here you have Vance telling the Israeli and American media that the Trump administration is at the 1-yard line with its Gaza peace plan, and it is very optimistic about the chances for punching it through the end zone. And so says the vice president. Now, where have I heard these football metaphors before? Yes, back in I believe it was June of 2024 when Genocide Joe was still ruling the White House, or at least nominally so. His genocidal Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, told The Hill that the ceasefire in Gaza was within the 10-yard line. So basically, we are being led to believe that in approximately 14 months of mass murder and starvation of Palestinian civilians, and particularly the children of Gaza, we've managed to move the ball 9 yards. Personally, I don't find any of these football metaphors convincing, nor is any of the peace-oriented rhetoric of the Trump regime. And I can say, frankly, my friends, that with a high degree of confidence, Vance is lying through his teeth. Why? Because just before I began this video, I checked the most reliable resistance channels on Telegram, and they are saying that Hamas has not even seen a new proposal from the mediators, let alone indicated that it is agreeable to the substance of it. Today, September 28th at 12:30 p.m. local time, Hamas issued this statement, quote, "The movement has not received any new proposals from the brotherly mediators regarding a ceasefire in Gaza. We are ready to study any proposals that reach us from the mediators with positivity and responsibility, provided they preserve the national rights of our people," close quote. Now, at this stage, the negotiations that are happening, it appears, are strictly between Israel and Washington, and perhaps also some mediators. So we're not even at the 50-yard line, let alone the 1-yard line. Now, let's review carefully the Times of Israel report on the 21-point peace plan to see whether this plan stands any realistic prospect of success. So here you'll see the report published yesterday. It's quite a lengthy one, titled "Revealed U.S. 21-Point Peace Plan for Ending Gaza War, Creating Pathway to Palestinian State." Now that is indeed a striking headline, because the Netanyahu regime has been saying virtually on a daily basis, not just during the genocide, but well before that, that it has absolutely no interest in giving the Palestinian people a state. And now they're categorically rejecting any prospect of a Palestinian state. And the recent recognition, belated and performative recognition of a Palestinian state by certain Western powers has in fact caused their anti-sovereignty rhetoric to become even more strident and definitive. They're ruling out categorically the Palestinians ever having a state. But for some reason, the Trump regime believes that it can convince the Israelis to give the Palestinian people a state, even as it continues to provide deadly weapons to Israel, to provide to Israel the means to destroy the Palestinian people. I gave you just one example moments ago, a $6.4 billion deal for dozens of deadly Apache helicopters and other lethal military equipment. I would say there's zero prospect of Washington persuading the Palestinians, the Israelis, to accord the Palestinians a truly sovereign state, or any kind of a state, even a rump state, as long as Washington continues to provide billions of dollars of deadly weaponry to the genocidal entity. So let's go on in this article. The article says the U.S. proposal for ending the war in Gaza encourages Palestinians to remain in the Strip. That too is a surprise, given the Donald's desire to ship Palestinians to some other country, some other impoverished country, and turn the Gaza Strip into, some gaudy casino paradise. So if we're to believe the Times of Israel, the Trump regime has changed its mind about the need to remove Palestinians from the lands to which they are indigenous. And it goes on to say the 21-point document shared by the U.S. with a handful of Arab Muslim countries earlier this week on the United Nations General Assembly sidelines also contains clauses that have been staples in various proposals crafted by different stakeholders in recent months, from the release of all hostages to Hamas's removal from power. But the decision to explicitly encourage Palestinians to remain in Gaza caps off a major evolution for Washington on the issue. I'll believe that when I see it, folks. The Times of Israel continues that the proposals envisioning of a potential pathway to a future Palestinian state after Gaza's redevelopment has advanced and the Palestinian Authority's reform has been completed also appears to be a major departure from the Trump administration's policy to date, given that it has avoided expressing backing for a two-state solution. And we should take a close look at this so-called proposal to see if, in fact, it constitutes backing for a two-state solution. We'll get to that in a moment. The plan obtained by the Times of Israel and authenticated by two sources familiar with the matter even sees the U.S. establishing a dialogue with Israel and the Palestinians to agree on a political horizon for peaceful coexistence. That is not a call for a Palestinian state. They might well be imagining some form of peaceful coexistence that entails the permanent subjugation of Palestinians in Bantustans that are controlled with brutal force by Israel. They would not hesitate to call that peaceful coexistence. And, it's quite important that we bear in mind that this is not a plan that has been officially endorsed by the Trump regime. What we're being told is that two unidentified sources who are familiar with the matter have authenticated the plan. Why, if this is in fact Washington's plan, wouldn't they just come out and say it's their plan? Well, I would suggest to you that the reason for that is plausible deniability. They want to be able to say, when the so-called negotiations for this plan inevitably fails, because even though it's grossly inadequate from the Palestinian perspective, much of it is unacceptable to the Netanyahu regime, they want to be able to say, well, we actually didn't put forward that plan at all. That was just some press report that was based upon anonymous leaks. So this is all about plausible deniability. If and when the Trump regime officially acknowledges that these are the 21 points in its plan, then I may begin to take the whole matter a little bit more seriously. So let's continue. They say, let's go straight to the 21 points. Number one, Gaza will be de-radicalized, terror-free zone that does not pose a threat to its neighbors. Well, the real threat here is not from Gaza to Israel. The real threat is from Israel to the Palestinian people. Every reputable independent human rights observer out there who has offered us details of the casualties on both sides, not just during the genocide, but prior to October 7th, 2023, has confirmed year after year that Israel routinely kills far more Palestinians than are killed on the Israeli side by Palestinian militants. The level of destruction that Israel has visited upon the civilian infrastructure of Gaza and the West Bank is infinitely worse than damage or destruction to civilian infrastructure in Israel caused by Palestinian militants. The Israelis have a state, a hyper-militarized state, whereas the Palestinians have no state and have had no state since the beginning, since the creation of the genocidal entity. And so it's very clear who the aggressor is. It's very clear whose radicalism poses the greatest threat. It is the radicalism of the Netanyahu regime, the fascist, genocidal radicalism of that regime that poses the threat. So putting the emphasis upon the Palestinians to de-radicalize Gaza is really an insult to our intelligence and a profound disregard for the value of Palestinian life. The second term is Gaza will be redeveloped for the benefit of its people. Okay, fine. What is the plan for doing that? Where's the money going to come from? How are the people going to be, the devastated civilian population of Gaza, how are they going to be sustained while the redevelopment of Gaza occurs? How long is this all going to take? Who is going to be in charge of the redevelopment of Gaza? How this, in fact, is carried out has profound implications for the well-being of the Palestinians living there. And frankly, they should be the ones who direct how the redevelopment money is deployed. But there's nothing in here addressing any of those issues. The third point in the 21-point plan, quote, if Israel and Hamas agree to this proposal, the war will immediately end, and with the IDF halting all operations and gradually withdrawing from the Strip. What does gradually mean? That is a very important consideration. Does it mean years, which undoubtedly the Palestinians would not accept? Or does it mean a few days or weeks, which is probably something that they could live with? 4, within 48 hours of Israel publicly accepting the deal, all living and deceased hostages will be returned. And then 5, once the hostages are returned, Israel will free several hundred Palestinian security prisoners serving life sentences and over 1,000 Gazans arrested since the start of the war, along with the bodies of several hundred Palestinians. This is a complete non-starter, folks. Why would the Palestinians give up all of the hostages, in fact, as I said, they're prisoners of war, before Israel has released any of the thousands, not thousands, but thousands of Palestinian civilians who are languishing in Israeli dungeons? This is asking basically the Palestinian factions to trust Israel, that it will carry out its end of the bargain. There is absolutely no reason on God's green earth why anybody would trust Israel to do that. It has repeatedly treated one ceasefire agreement it entered into after another as toilet paper. So this, in and of itself, is a non-starter. There's no way I can imagine that the Palestinians would agree to releasing the 20 prisoners of war. I call them prisoners of war because, according to reports from Israeli media, they're all soldiers in the Israeli military. And quite apart from that, why only 1,000 Palestinian hostages would be released when there are many thousands of Palestinians languishing in the dungeons of Israel? Then let's go on to point 6. Once the hostages are returned, Hamas members who commit to peaceful coexistence will be granted amnesty, while members who wish to leave the Strip will be granted safe passage to receiving countries. There's no way that any Palestinian militant leader is going to agree to refrain from armed resistance unless the demands of the Palestinian people are met. And this sounds like a demand that Palestinian militants lay down their weapons before they have a Palestinian state, before the occupation has been brought to an end, and before Israel begins to respect the basic human rights of the Palestinian people. I think you can fairly assume that will be unacceptable to the Palestinians, and understandably so. Then point 7, once the agreement is reached, aid will surge into the Strip at rates no lower than the benchmark set in the January 2025 hostage deal, which included 600 trucks of aid per day, along with the rehabilitation of critical infrastructure and the entry of equipment for removing rubble. I can't see anything on that in that particular term that is objectionable on its face, although I would question whether 600 trucks is anywhere close to enough, considering the current condition of the civilian population of Gaza. And then aid will be distributed without interference from either side by the United Nations and the Red Crescent, along with other international organizations not associated with either Israel or Hamas. I suspect that would be acceptable to the Palestinians, although the very first agency that should be called upon to distribute aid should be the United Nations Relief Works Agency, which has a wealth of expertise in this area and is the agency that is best positioned to deliver the aid to Palestinians as effectively and as quickly as possible. So now let's go to condition 9. Gaza will be administered by a temporary transitional government of Palestinian technocrats who will be responsible for providing day-to-day services to the people of the Strip. The committee will be supervised by a new international body established by the U.S. in consultation with the Arab and European partners. It will establish a framework for funding the redevelopment of Gaza until the Palestinian Authority has completed its reform program. Well, I think the first part of that ninth term, that Gaza will be temporarily governed by a transitional body of Palestinian technocrats, based on statements I've seen from Hamas, that would be acceptable. But the idea that the United States and Europe, which have enabled Israel to commit this genocide, are going to have any kind of authority over that transitional body, or have any kind of control over the purse strings of its budget, is absolutely ludicrous. The leaders of these countries who are now demanding that they have some kind of authority over that transitional body should be rotting in a jail cell at The Hague for aiding and abetting a genocide. They should have absolutely no involvement, zero, in the governance of Gaza. Not now, not in the near term, not in the long term. And then the Times of Israel goes on to say that this is the U.S. plan's first mention of the Ramallah-based PA. Israel has ruled out the authority as a potential ruler of Gaza, thereby nixing what has become the key to recruiting Arab resistance in the post-war management of the Strip. Let's be very clear here. I mean, it's amazing that Israel is rejecting the Palestinian Authority as the new government of the Gaza Strip, because the Palestinian Authority is a collaborator. The Palestinian Authority has done much of the dirty work for the occupation for many years, which is precisely why it is deeply unpopular. I've covered this repeatedly in recent episodes of Reason to Resist. The amount of hostility towards Mahmoud Abbas amongst the Palestinians living under occupation is incalculable. He has an extremely low approval rating, and imposing him upon the people of Gaza, and indeed upon the people of the West Bank, is profoundly violative of the popular will of the Palestinian people. And that's something that the Palestinian factions other than Fatah are very unlikely to ever accept, and I'm sure that Hamas will reject it. Then Clause 10, an economic plan will be created to rebuild Gaza through the convening of experts with experience in constructing modern Middle East cities and so on. Well, I think there the devil will be in the details. Who are these experts and what authority will they have? Then on the next page, Term 11, an economic zone will be established with reduced tariffs and access rates to be regulated by participating countries. Nothing objectionable in that term on its face. 12, no one will be forced to leave Gaza, but those who choose to leave will be allowed to return. That's a good sign that that term is in there. 13, Hamas will have no role in Gaza's governance whatsoever. There will be a commitment to destroy and stop building any offensive military infrastructure, including tunnels. Gaza's new leaders will commit to peaceful coexistence with their neighbors. Again, this is not for us to decide. I've said this many times. Whether or not you like Hamas, approve of Hamas, you are not the one who will live under their rule or the rule of some competing political organization or movement. This is ultimately a decision of the Palestinian people. And if we have the right to dictate to the Palestinians who can and cannot be the leaders of their government, then we should be able to dictate to Israel who can and cannot be the leaders of their people. So, for example, we would be perfectly entitled to say that all of the political leaders who have supported this genocide, and it's not just Netanyahu, it's not just the people in his cabinet, it's Yair Lapid, it's Benny Gantz, it's Avigdor Lieberman, it's Naftali Bennett, and on and on. All of them have supported and egged on this genocide. So if we can say to the Palestinians, Hamas, whose killing of civilians pales in comparison to the killing by Israel of Palestinian civilians, Hamas cannot be part of your government, then the Palestinians should have every right to dictate to Israel who can and cannot be ruling them. And of course, no one in the West is ready to accede to that proposition. So basically, we just have no business telling the Palestinians who can and cannot be in their government. And furthermore, Hamas, as I said, is not going to agree to live in peaceful coexistence with Israel before Israel has ended the occupation and given the Palestinian people a viable and sovereign state. And then Clause 14, a security guarantee will be provided by regional partners to ensure that Hamas and other Gaza factions comply with their obligations and that Gaza ceases to pose a threat to Israel or its own people. Again, they're putting the emphasis on the threat posed by Palestinians to Israel when the emphasis should be on the threat posed by Israel to Palestinians. And the security guarantees should not be designed to protect primarily Israel, which has ample military capability to defend itself. The security guarantee should be designed to protect the victims of Israel's Western-backed genocide. Clause 15, the U.S. will work with Arab and other international partners to develop a temporary institutional stabilizing force that will immediately deploy in Gaza to oversee security in the Strip. When they say Arab, they're referring here to the forces of the Arab autocracies that are vassals of Washington. That is unacceptable. They are going to do whatever is necessary to prolong the subjugation of the Palestinian people. These Arab autocracies and the military forces they command cannot be trusted to provide for the security of the Palestinian people. 16, Israel will not occupy or annex Gaza, and the IDF will gradually hand over territory it currently occupies as the replacement security forces establish control and stability in the Strip. There's absolutely no reason for this clause, which on its face is unobjectionable, that it not be extended to the West Bank. The occupation, as the International Court of Justice ruled last year, is illegal. The occupation of both the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. And this document, any peace deal, should provide for an end to the entire occupation and not just the occupation of Gaza. Then Clause 17, if Hamas delays or rejects this proposal, the above points will proceed in terror-free areas, which the IDF will gradually hand over to the International Stabilization Force. I don't even know where to begin with that one. That is just a dog's breakfast. Clause 18, Israel agrees not to carry out future strikes in Qatar. The U.S. and the international community acknowledge Doha's important mediating role in the Gaza conflict. I wonder why that so-called guarantee. And by the way, Israel has said very clearly that it reserves the right to attack Qatar again if it doesn't hand over Hamas officials. So what are the prospects of Israel agreeing to this? But why doesn't this extend to other sovereign states in the region, like Lebanon and like Syria, or indeed the other Arab autocracies that, up until now at least, have regarded Washington as their ally? This should be an undertaking that Israel extends to all of the sovereign states of the region. Clause 19, a process will be established to de-radicalize the population. This will include an interfaith dialogue aimed at changing mindsets and narratives in Israel and Gaza. Well, they say the population. They're not clear which population they're referring to, but we've seen poll after poll showing that a majority of the Israeli Jewish population of Israel supports the destruction of the Palestinian people. We've seen, heavily armed settlers in the West Bank, the occupied West Bank, carrying out pogroms. We have seen Israelis attacking humanitarian aid trucks that are waiting to be led into the devastated Gaza Strip. So if there's any population, just look at the facts on the ground, folks, and who suffered more. If there's any population that needs to be de-radicalized, it's the population, the Jewish Israeli population of Israel. Clause 20, when Gaza's redevelopment has been advanced and the PA returns, a reform program has been implemented, the conditions may be in place for a credible pathway to Palestinian statehood, which is recognized as the aspiration of the Palestinian people. The key word here is may. So they're saying when the PA engages in democratic reform, and let's be honest, they don't want the PA to be democratic. They want the Palestinian Authority to be a vassal of Israel in Washington. So, it's quite rich of them to be demanding democratic reform from a corrupt collaborator who is the way it is because that's the way they want it to be. But what they're saying here is that even if that happens, the necessary reforms take place, the conditions may be in place for a credible pathway, not for a Palestinian state, but for a credible pathway to Palestinian statehood. There is so much murkiness and ambiguity and wiggle room built into this language that there is zero prospect of any rational, responsible leader of the Palestinian people acceding to this, especially when the demand is being made that the Palestinians disarm and that a corrupt collaborator be put in charge, at least nominally, of all of occupied Palestine. And finally, Clause 21, the U.S. will establish a dialogue between Israel and the Palestinians to agree on a political horizon for peaceful coexistence. Again, murky language, huge amounts of wiggle room. If you were dealing with a counterparty in this negotiation whose history, whose record demonstrated that it can be trusted, maybe you could live with a language that isn't particularly concrete and precise. But this kind of language, when you're dealing with as perfidious, as treacherous, as dishonest a regime as that of Israel or the United States, that would be and should be unacceptable to any responsible leader of the Palestinian people. So I come back, my friends, to what I said at the very outset of this report. We're being treated yet again to Kabuki theater, and all of this is likely to be designed to do nothing more than persuade an increasingly restive Western population that the Trump regime is doing all that it can to secure an end to the slaughter in Gaza. My strong recommendation to people of conscience is that you all simply ignore this Kabuki theater. The endless blather about proposals and plans and mediation negotiation is simply designed to buy more time for Israel to prolong the slaughter and complete its genocidal project. As people of conscience, our singular objective should be to escalate the pressure on our governments to stop the genocide and deliver liberation at last to the Palestinian people. And there's now plenty of evidence that the pressure has begun to yield meaningful results, even though we might remain a long way away from victory for Palestinians. So we're seeing now that Western governments are beginning to impose meaningful sanctions upon Israel, most notably the total arms embargo imposed by Spain, but that's not the only sanction we're seeing. We're seeing the governments of Spain and Italy sending naval vessels to protect the Gaza flotilla. We're seeing larger and larger protests, the recent protests in Italy, in particular the general strike, the demands of dock workers that no vessels entering Italian ports be permitted to deliver military equipment or dual-use items to the genocidal Israeli entity. The polling data in the West, there's sign after sign after sign that support for Israel is collapsing, and that the pressure on Western governments to act is becoming so great that they now have no alternative but to do so. For many years, I've said that Israel is a house of cards, and that one day it would come crashing down with so much swiftness that the rapidity of its collapse would take our breath away. That day may finally be at hand, my friends. This is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from Kalamata, Greece on September 28th, 2025.